So that's conditional access, which we recommend that you get at least some of those policies in place as soon as possible, really. But now we're going to talk a bit more about Endpoint Manager, both mobile devices, and we'll come on to Windows devices as well, and what Endpoint Manager challenges what challenges it helps us sort of tackle, really, around mobile devices and Windows devices. So from a security perspective, our challenges with mobile devices are that we need to ensure that company mobile devices meet our security standards. How do we make sure that if we want every device to be encrypted, to be of a certain software version, to be encrypted, to obviously have encryption, to have a PIN code on the device, how do we ensure that the device meets those standards is a challenge in itself. And then the second one is, how do we allow people to access our company data from personal devices, which obviously does have business advantages from a flexibility perspective. But the challenge with those devices, we can't have the same level of control that we do with company devices because they're not ours, or they're not the business's devices. So you don't necessarily want the person who owns that device probably won't want you to have the ability to configure it, probably won't want you to be able to enforce passcodes on it, to wipe the device, that sort of thing. But you've still got the concern of how do we secure our company data. So the policies that we recommend you put in place to sort of tackle these two challenges are, the first one is to put in place compliance and configuration policies for iOS and Android company-owned devices. So the compliance policy is your standard. So all iOS devices might have to have a certain version, a PIN code that's alphanumeric, and they must be encrypted and they can't be jailbroken, for example. That would be your compliance standard, and any device that's enrolled into your organization would be reviewed against those standards, so you can see which meet the standards, which don't. And then you've also got configuration policy where you can actually push those configuration standards to say, for example, I want the screen to lock on a device after it's been idle for 3 minutes, for example, to make sure that they don't just pick it up and access data on the device. You can configure that using those policies. And again, there are examples, but the real world examples of the details of those policies are included in the document, so you can take a look at that. And the other sort of policy that we recommend is around the second challenge, which is to implement the MAM policies for BYOD devices. And we'll go ahead and have a quick look at those in the portal. But effectively, what they do is they allow us to control at the app level. If you've got people using personal devices, they might install Word, OneDrive, Outlook on the device, but we can actually, without controlling the full device, we have control over those apps. We can enforce PIN codes on them, on the apps themselves. We have the ability to wipe the apps themselves, stop people copying and pasting data out of them, that sort of stuff, without, again, sort of invading privacy and control devices that aren't necessarily the businesses. So a couple of quick demos of how these look in the portal. First of all is what a compliance policy looks like in here. If we have a quick look on the screen now, we can see an iOS compliance policy here, and we just get a bit of an idea of what this looks like in the portal in Endpoint Manager and what these sort of settings are. So we can see here, for example, we won't allow jailbroken devices. We will block simple passwords. All passwords must be alphanumeric and 6 characters in length. The screen will lock after 1 minute if it's idle, and the password will expire after, I think it's at 60 days there. And this is where you go to configure those within Endpoint Manager. You can see there's a lot more settings in here that you can utilize. So that's a compliance policy to set your compliance standard. What is your security standard you want the mobile device to meet? And that'll be different for different organizations. But again, our sort of policy gives you a good guideline, you know, which you can use and maybe tweak slightly to implement things that are right for your business. But again, all the details there, so you could literally just look at that policy in the document and configure it in the portal to get to this point. So that's compliance policy. The next part is the app protection policy. So this can be used on company devices and BYOD personal devices, which is where they are particularly useful because it allows you to control the application themselves. So if we just sort of take a look in here, this is again in the Endpoint Manager portal. Take a look at the app protection policies, and if we go in there, we'll go to the properties of this policy. We can go and actually have a look at some of the settings that we've configured. we've got data protection. What we can see in here now is we can see, for example, we're not going to allow our apps to be backed up to iTunes or iCloud, because if somebody leaves, we don't know, we don't have access to those backups, and our company data is effectively in there. So we stop those apps being able to be backed up to iTunes and iCloud. We allow users to only save copies of, I don't know, documents to certain services. So if they've got a, if they've only got, one sec, let's get this back up. So we only allow them to sort of save in OneDrive. Basically, if they've got an attachment from email, we won't allow them to save it to their phone directly, but we will allow them to save it to OneDrive on their phone. So you can see there, we can also restrict the copy and paste for these apps as well. So there's a setting just here, restrict copy and paste between other apps. So it'll basically prevent people from copying data from their work apps into their personal apps, you know, just to help you sort of protect that data, that company information. And this is sort of the access, more about the access requirements for these apps. So if someone's got Outlook or OneDrive on their device, we can require a PIN to access it, because at the end of the day, you've got no way to sort of guarantee that people have got a PIN code on their device itself. So what you want to be able to do is to make sure that if it's a personal device and it hasn't got a PIN on, that if that device got stolen or someone just picked it up, they couldn't just sort of get into the device without a PIN and then open one of the apps because of that lack of PIN on the device. So you can actually say, right, even on a personal device, these apps must have a PIN, or can use a biometric fingerprint you can see in there to access them apps. But it just means that the business can control what they should be controlling without necessarily controlling the full device. And again, these policies are all specified in the document that we'll be sharing with you after the webinar. There was, guys. So that was app protection policies.
Excuse me, guys. Just gonna just lost the slide. Just gonna very quickly get them back on your screen. Just bear with us.
Share it.
Yeah, just share it. Excuse me, guys. Just bear with us. Just gonna take a second.
Yeah, brilliant. Sorry about that. Oh, but I pressed escape on the screen.
Should be able to see that now.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Sorry about that. So Endpoint Manager, that was app protection policies and mobile devices. So now we've got Windows devices. How can Endpoint Manager help us improve our security with Windows devices? So first of all, what policies do we recommend that you put in place using this technology? So we recommend that you put in place a compliance policy again, but for Windows devices, to say this is our security standard. Devices must have this version of Windows. They must be BitLockered, and that the devices will be compared to that compliance policy, and can be used in conditional access to say, right, this device, the connection coming from this device meets our compliance standard. Let's allow it in. This one doesn't. Let's block it, or MFA it. So we'll show you where they're set up in a sec. The second thing that you can do is not just review to see if compliance, if BitLocker's set up on a device to see if it meets compliance. The second thing what you can actually do is you can actually use Endpoint Manager to configure BitLocker on devices as well. So it actually pushes that setting and forces BitLocker to be configured on the devices. And we'll show you where that is as well. So we recommend these two things to get them in place. And the third one is using Endpoint Manager to manage OneDrive. So what you can do is you can push a policy to all your devices that basically would, for example, and these are the three things we recommend you do anyways, prevent personal account syncing with OneDrive, because you don't know what data people will be syncing to their device through OneDrive. So you can put a policy out there to prevent that. You can restrict tenant access, so you can configure it so that they can only add OneDrive accounts to their OneDrive client on their work device that are for your organization. They can't add accounts for other organizations. And another sort of really useful and handy policy to put in place is to force the OneDrive client to silently move the known folders. It provides the user with a bit of a backup really for things that are on the desktop, that are in the sort of downloads and documents folders on the device. Automatically automatically synchronizes that data with OneDrive, so you can force that to all the devices by default using Endpoint Manager for Windows devices. So just going to show you the portal again for these things. So for compliance policies, show you some options for Windows devices. So again, to reiterate, compliance policies, this is our standard, our security standard. Is this device meeting it? That's effectively what these policies are doing. You can see in here the compliance settings, requiring secure boot to be enabled. Run the settings down, you can take a quick look at them. So requiring secure boot enabled, require a certain version of operating system, right down to the patch level. Do we require a password on the device to unlock it? Do we require it to be encrypted? Do we require antivirus on the device? No anti-spyware, is there something run on there? If it isn't, it would be non-compliant. We don't want it in our tenant if we don't want antivirus. It could be accessing our data. And then the second part was the endpoint security policy to not just read and review the device's current security posture, but to actually push settings to the device. And in this particular case, what we recommend doing is using it to push out Bitlocker, to enable Bitlocker on the devices. So in the endpoint security section on the left, you can go in and you can go to the disk encryption settings, and you can get all of your Bitlocker settings in here that you want to push to a device. In terms of exactly what type of encryption level you want to use, key rotation, all of those sort of Bitlocker settings that a lot of admins are used to. Send out through group policy, we're all in here. And the benefit is that whether they're on the network or not, the internet will get these policies and it'll force this policy on the device.